Good evening. We're going to open the meeting for the City of Walker Planning Commission. First item is review of meeting minutes. I've got the minutes from the September 21 meeting.
Doesn't sound like your mic is on. Oh, it's on, but it doesn't sound. Test.
Okay, maybe I'm not close enough.
Okay.
So, is there a motion with regard to the minutes of the September 21 meeting?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Second.
Okay, motion by Tyler, supported by Scott to approve the minutes from September 21. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. Opportunity here for general public comment. If you're here for a non-agenda item, or if you're here for an agenda item, you have to want just a general comment you want to offer. This is an opportunity. No takers, so we'll move right into the agenda items. The first one is a public hearing with regard to a request for approval of a monument sign as a PUD benefit, and turn it over to Community Development Director Frank Wash.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. 3 items on the agenda, and we tried to put them, this one, which is fairly simple, first. What you're looking at is a request for a monument sign that exceeds the ordinance standards, but not by much. I think it's a reasonable ask. We allow a 48 square foot sign by code and 6 feet tall. So you can see that the sign actually meets the height. It's 71.5 inches, but it's 120 wide. So you're looking at a 60 square foot ground sign that exceeds the allowance of 48 square feet by an additional 12 feet of ground sign area. So that's the main issue, but if you don't mind, I'll run through a couple of other comments in my staff report. You folks are familiar with this site. You recently approved the plan. The site is under construction, and this is at the corner, southeastern corner of Northridge Drive and Walker Avenue. So if we take a look at section 94.410 regarding ground-mounted monument signs, the address numbers have to be on the base or somewhere that's legible. So this graphic should be edited to show the address numbers. Helps out delivery drivers. I know everyone has Waze or something like that now, but it's still good to get the numbers on there. You're only allowed 1 ground-mounted sign per lot, and they're only asking for 1, unless I am in error there. I'd ask the applicants to clarify. And we've already gone over the area and the PUD benefit that they're asking for some additional square footage of ground signage. And let's see, there is a requirement for 5 feet of setback from any property line. And I think we're good on there, but we should have those notes added to the graphic. It just helps us when it comes to issuing a sign permit that everything, all the text is on there. They look okay as far as width goes, but I think we need to get that note on there as well, just because it's not marked. You can see the cross-section of the sign. It looks like it works, but looks like and is are 2 different things, so we'd rather see the numbers on there. The width has to be 2 feet or less face to face. And then last but not least, there should be some detail added for the masonry base. We allow a variety of materials because this is a planned unit development. Commercial planned unit development, we ask for brick or block real stuff, not sticky material, not the veneer. And they will also need a concrete cap on there. You see a cap, I don't know what that is. We should require that. And then a frost-free foundation should be detailed as well, because that will be required for this sign as part of the sign permit. And our recommendation is that all of the aforementioned comments from me should be conditions of approval. And I will hand it back to you folks.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Any questions for the staff report? Okay, there being none, before we open the public hearing, have the applicant come forward and add any comments you'd like to provide.
Good evening, Dan from Post to the Sign.
If you could push the button there at the base.
I got it.
Yeah.
Good evening, Dan Postmus from Post to the Sign and Graphics. Frank, are you in control of the graphic here or not?
Yes, to a limited extent, it's a PDF. So
yeah, can you scroll so that we can see the upper area of it? So there is I think it's labeled there in the upper right, monument sign. I think there's a measurement on it, takes care of the showing where it's gonna get positioned and the distance from the right of way.
Let's see, upper right. Yep, it went up. And for some reason,
No, it just says monument sign, but, we'll get a measurement on there of where it's going. So it gives a description here, and as it's drawn, it has an aluminum base, per J&H's request. So that's how I've quoted it and priced it to them. And so that's why we're here, asking for the square footage and asking for the base to be aluminum, with an aluminum cap. From distance, you can't really tell the difference. I'm not sure where the concrete bases or brick bases has come from in Walker, but and certainly we can get them labeled. The width of the sign is certainly less than 24. It's more like 16 perhaps. A little bit of the ask for the square footage is, I'm not building this sign. It comes from a national manufacturer, and they're kind of standards between mobile, what the manufacturer can do for LEDs, how they're positioned, and with J&H having multiple things happening there, the LED got to be a certain size, and so on. So if you got any questions of me?
Any questions for the applicant?
You said that the base is aluminum?
It is.
That's against the code. Correct, Frank?
yeah, we've had that standard in since at least, I would say 2006, 2007. So it's been around a long time. As part of PUDs, we typically ask for some kind of improvement in exchange for a PUD benefit. And here they're asking for an increased size, which I think is reasonable. But what you'll see on most of our PUD ground signs is a masonry base, which will be either block or brick. Aluminum, you can certainly make that call from a planning commission standpoint. It'd be a little bit outside of the code, but we try to be as flexible as possible with non-PUD signs, especially for replacements. This one's new. I think I would, from a staff standpoint, we would say it needs to be brick block and real material. But that's your call, really.
Any other questions, comments?
Frank, the benefits of a block base versus the aluminum, I mean,
Well, I think what we did on the sign code years ago, and we continue to try and do this, is make these signs and buildings look good and sustainable for the long run. So if you look around town, there are many ground signs that have gone in with a brick or a block base, and they stand the test of time, you know. So that was the intent for the original code, was to put something in that has a higher standard, particularly for PUDs, just because you want this stuff to look good and look good for a long time. We certainly, again, the Planning Commission has the ability to change that code, but from a staff standpoint, even when the city redid all of our signs, we said, no, we need to follow the code. There's a reason for that, and it's to put in a material that's going to withstand the test of time. It's one of those indicators that there's some sustainability in the community. You know, I know that sounds esoteric, but from a planning standpoint, that's why we look for brick buildings, block buildings, decorative buildings, as opposed to metal siding and EFS. We try to have some standards here that, you know, are they the cheapest option? Probably definitely not, but it's sustainable for time. But again, it's the Planning Commission's call.
I will add, the aluminum base is not a chintzy aluminum base. I mean, there's structure to it, there's angle, aluminum in the corners of it. It's 080, it's bent up, it's not just an 040 flimsy aluminum. The cap is 1x3 U-channel, skin top and bottom, so there's girth to it. it will hold the test of time. We've made them for years and years and years, but
If I may, Frank, you'd mentioned not only the concrete base, but also a
Cement cap.
cement cap on it as well.
Cement cap is typically what we would look for. I think what the gentleman might have just said, that's an aluminum cap too.
it is. It
different
goes
color?
with aluminum. If it was gonna be brick, yes, it would certainly be a cast cap.
And the one thing I would add from a staff standpoint too is remember where this is at. You know, it's really a prominent entry to a major industrial park. And originally, gas stations weren't even allowed in this planned unit development. So I think the city has done a lot of give and take here to do something that originally wasn't intended for the PUD. But now that Northridge is connected so far between Fruit Ridge and all the way to Bristol, a gas station makes sense. So I think that's where staff said, okay, we can live with that. The situation has changed up there. There's so much of a concentration of logistics uses up along the Northridge corridor that another fuel station would be a good idea. However, it's still a main entry to a major industrial park. So I don't think you're gonna hear staff say that, yeah, we're okay. Staff isn't gonna give you a recommendation to go with aluminum. Staff is gonna say, well, let's do what we've done with other major entry points since this code's been in for 15 plus years, and require either the block or the brick. Either way, whatever you pass, it still will need a frost-free foundation for the poles that support, or the pole that supports the sign. And that's so it doesn't tip over.
We certainly have a frost. We're down 42 inches, calculate the square footage of what we need for a foundation to pour it in. But
Is the aluminum painted or polished?
it's primed, it's painted, it's clear coated, and it's baked.
Okay.
Well, seems like we spend a lot of time on signs, and we got these big projects going on. I would say you guys say these are better signs that you have. Let's do what you say you have. Would be my feeling. I've got a nice, I went out there today and saw it. Everything's going in, the gas stations, and, yeah. I'd move with what you say we should do.
All right, this is a public hearing. Thank you, Tyler.
I make a motion to open the public hearing.
Support.
Moved by Tyler, supported by Steve, to open the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Any comments from the public? Okay,
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
motion by Tyler, supported by Steve, to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carried. Well, I think that if it's gonna be a concrete base, we'd wanna, have it matched likewise with a, concrete top on it. And likewise, so some consistency on the top and the bottom. Any preferences?
I'm gonna stick to the code. I've been here a long time and we don't vary from that. I can't remember the last time we varied from that, so.
Yep, I agree with that too. I mean, that is a prominent location. And this is a larger sign than the others, so it really needs to look good and to stay there a while. So I agree, we need to stick to the code.
Okay, any other comments? Do we have a motion?
Well, my question is, the applicant understand that we're voting on on the code base?
That's fine.
Sure.
Sorry.
Got to push the button.
Push it again.
Okay, got to be lit. Don Vandenberg, representing J&H Oil. Yeah, we would, if that's the way it's gonna go, we would then make that a block, a split face color block with a precast sill, that would match the building. The building has that on the lower 3 or 4 foot around the building, so we would match the building then with that base, which would be a masonry base with a cap. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. All right,
Mr. Chair, case number 22-030, I make a motion to approve the final area site plan amendment for J&H Oil ground mounted monument signage with the material and application dated received 9/8/22, subject to the following conditions and based on the findings of fact noted below. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the Community Development Director's letter dated 9/23, noting that the base must follow the code. Findings of fact per section 94-213 stated in the affirmative and based on the content of the final area site plan amendment for the ground mounted monument sign, the J&H Oil CPUD as illustrated and described by the original final area site plan, and this amendment continues to meet the standards contained in section 94-213 3G of Walker zoning code and continues to meet applicable standards for review. Number two, the final area site plan amended herein remains in substantial compliance with the previously approved PSP and final area site plan, consisting of the maps and accompanying written materials required under section 94-213 of the Walker zoning code.
we have a motion,
Second.
supported by Joe. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Next item on agenda is a site plan review relating to an proposed office building at 3500 Alpine Avenue. Again, we'll look to Community Development Director Frank Wash to introduce that project.
You gotta slow down, I'm old. All right. Let's take a look at a medical office proposed for 3500 Alpine Avenue. This is a demolition and rebuild that we see more and more on Alpine Avenue as a lot of our commercial sites age out and they're not up to current standards or someone has a different idea. So this is at the southeastern corner of Kingsbury and Alpine Avenue, which is M37. You're probably familiar with the PNC Bank that was there before it closed. Site's vacant. And I've included a variety of maps and views for you folks in your staff report, but I wanted to put the plan up here because this is what it comes down to. We're looking at site plan review. Scott has a report as well, so I'm going to try to be brief, but if you don't mind, I'll go through a couple items in my staff report, which isn't terribly long on this one. The site is dual zoned, and I don't know what that is, if that's a mapping error. In the past, what I've seen is from the 60s, 70s, 80s, the city used to use dual zoning as a buffering tool. But you can clearly see on the aerial photograph that this site was not built to dual zoning. So it may just be a mapping error from back in the 90s when we remapped all of our zoning. That being the case, the way we look at dual zoning, it really isn't called out in the zoning code for how you handle dual zoning. Some communities do that. We're going to put that in the new code. But by far, this site is zone C1. So we're going to go with C1. That's what was there before. And now you have probably a more recent C1 code, so this site needs to meet the current C1 district code. So it's really a punch list item look at this site. And there are a couple of items on the plan that I just want to call out. The building itself has two different numbers on the plan. All I'm looking for is consistency on all graphics, all sheets. Whether it's 3619 square feet or 3551, it really doesn't matter to us. We just want to make sure that on all the notes and the plans, it all matches one number. That will solve one issue before they get their building permit. So that's a minor item. Sidewalk, I'm going to propose that you talk through with Scott. I've got a Google Street View to show what it looks like out there now and what they're proposing. And obviously sidewalk in this part of town where it's urbanized is an important feature for this plan. So I'm going to ask you to discuss that with Scott, and then I'll have the Google Street View up if you are so inclined to look at that. There's a couple of items that we typically do for retrofits on Alpine Avenue, and it deals with access management. You may, and this is going to be completely up to you folks. I'll go either way, but I can tell you historically what we've done since I arrived here in '04 is when we get a chance, we look at driveway access to M37 and we look at cross access to adjacent lots. Now, neither one is perfect here, and this is a little bit of an oddball site because if you recall years ago, we had Kingsbury as a full-service drive, and it was one of the top crash intersections in Kent County. So we worked with MDOT to put that island in there, and that is no longer a top crash intersection in Kent County. So it's a cause and effect. You take away the left turns on that 6-lane section of M37, and you don't get the crashes from left turns, right? It works. So those things at Kingsbury, and then at the Circuit City Drive, which is now Best Buy, that was another major crash area. We did the same thing, put in the island, took away the left turns, and now you don't have the crashes anymore. So you'll always hear staff say, you know what, this is another opportunity where you have a back door and around to a signal, which is just adjacent to Steak and Shake and the strip mall to the south, where if you want to make a left turn, you can use Kingsbury, and then you can get around, and you can make a left turn at a signalized intersection. That's completely up to you folks to decide. I think you're going to hear the applicant make a case they need the full service drive there. The only thing I'm going to say is, you know, this isn't a high traffic generator, but it's still a 6-lane cross section with that weird through lane going northbound. And that's where we're getting a lot of the crashes because typically that lane moves and left turners don't realize that. Somebody will wave them through and then they'll get T-boned by the car that's going 40 miles an hour. The other item for cross access, there are certainly a couple of spots to the south that we can make them pave to their property line at 24 feet. You never know how long Steak and Shake's going to be around, especially in today's commercial environment. That could flip tomorrow. So what we've done over the years, and you probably see a couple of sites, is there will be a 24-foot drive aisle paved to the south property line. It may not make perfect sense now, but it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier when that Steak and Shake site comes in, and then we can just plug into it. The most logical spot is probably at the southwestern corner of this lot. The back, obviously, is where they want to put their dumpster, and you can see why they want to put it there. So it's an item for you guys to discuss. I told the developer I'm going to throw those back out there for those two items, and it will be up to your pleasure. Building facade looks good. The ephes is way above ground level. If you're not familiar with ephes, it's kind of a foam board. It's hard, but in this climate, it doesn't do well if it's in contact with the ground. So you don't see that much anymore, but it's way up high. That'll be good. They will need permits for the pylon sign and the future wall signs. Pylon signs are allowed in the C1 district. This is not a PUD. So they can go with the pylon sign, and what they've shown meets the code. There's one of the big issues is the buffering to the home to the east. And currently, if you look at the aerial photo, you can see there's not much of a buffer there at all, but there is a fence, at least over part of it. What they're doing is bringing the site up to code for landscape buffering along the easterly edge, so that's good. I think they should keep the fence too. That would be nice, unless it's completely wrecked. That would help keep that privacy fence in place. I think that'd be good for the adjacent homeowner. We do need the lighting plan sheet on C7 to show 0 lumens at that easterly lot line. I think that's done. They can probably do that by moving some stuff around as far as fixtures go and directing those LEDs. We certainly would encourage LED here for obvious reasons, you know, efficiency and also directional light. So that's what I have for comments. I'm going to get out of the way and let Scott do his. This is a site plan review, so it's not a public hearing. And that's enough.
Okay, first, any questions for Frank's presentation? Okay. Switch over to City Engineer Scott Connors.
So 2 quick ordinance compliant issues that are listed first in my memo there. We had asked that the sidewalk be built through the driveways. It's pretty standard for us. We may have had a miscommunication because what they did was just stripe it through the driveways, and most facility owners like this aren't going to go out and restripe that every year and make sure that it's kept up. So that's kind of why we require the concrete through there. It makes it much more clear who has the right of way on a driveway like this, and it's always the pedestrian, especially in an area like this where you've got a lot more people walking every day. There's more and more people out there, and access to the bus routes and things like that. So we really want to hold tight to that and make sure both driveways have the concrete sidewalk through. And then the driveway that's on Kingsbury, that's a very tight right-of-way. It's pretty narrow, but our standards call for a 30-foot radius for those drives so that you can get vehicles in there. You might have vehicles coming in here with some medical equipment and things like that. So a bigger radius helps. We do occasionally reduce that to 20 in areas like this, and so that's what I would propose, is that we would allow 20 without any kind of a variance, and that should take care of that. The last item is related to the back access road, and it really seems like, I mean, they're real close to what would probably be allowed for two-way access. They're at 22 feet, and I think you have a color picture in your memo. When I printed it out as black and white, I'm hoping it's colored for you. And we kind of sketched out two different ways that that could be done with limited impact on the 15-foot buffer, maybe an impact of 1 or 2 feet in just one spot. And we would recommend that that be increased to the 24 feet to allow that, so that you don't end up with people disobeying the one way, and that could even be worse for the neighbor potentially with horns and brakes and things like that. It would just be safer to have good access all the way around. That's it for us.
Comments, questions?
Scott, I guess I'd offer a comment, I guess in support of the, taking the sidewalk through the driveways. I think it provides, they're showing some type of marking on the pavement, but I think that having the consistent concrete sidewalk go through the driveways is clear year-round. And so I think that's a good suggestion in terms of recommendation in terms of this particular project.
I might add too, Terry, that this picture is a great picture to look at. If you look at the plan, it looks like the sidewalk goes south to then connect to that and then come back to the north. That's because of that grade change that you see right there. So in order for that to meet the ADA requirements and be flat enough for wheelchairs, they have to kind of, they have to go backwards to lose some grade and to get to that sidewalk in a way that you can go from point A to point B on a little bit more of a stagger and still be flat enough to meet code.
Very good.
It's pretty irregular.
Well, this is an opportunity for the applicant to come forward and offer your comments with regard to the project.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Mitchell Harvey of Stonefield Engineering. I'm here representing the applicant. I won't go through the whole project again. I think, the city staff did a great job of going over that. I just do want to highlight a few things. The medical office will be 3,551. That was a typo on the plans where it was slightly larger. I would note that we are proposing 23 parking spaces, which is right about at the minimum of what this user would like to have for this site. Regarding the comments, I think Mr. Connors addressed the reason why our sidewalk kind of skews around in front there. It's to maintain ADA compliancy. And then regarding the Alpine Ave curb cut. So as a medical office, this is a pretty low traffic generator, so we don't have those sharp peaks and sharp valleys like you would with the restaurant during lunch and dinner time. You have more platooned groups of people showing up, so you'll have appointments staggered out. So you'd have 1, maybe 2 cars turning left into the site. And then I also want to point out that there is a left-hand turn in lane on Alpine Ave, so that's what vehicles would be utilizing, would be that left-hand turn lane in to get into the site, so it wouldn't be slowing down traffic on either side. The cross access to the south, really at 23 parking spaces, we can't lose significantly more, and by putting in a drive aisle there, that's going to put us 19, 18. It's going to eat up anywhere from 4 to 5 spaces with the required curb lines. We also have a utility pole over there that we would have to work around, as well as a fair grade change between the two sites. If you actually notice, there's a retaining wall along the southern edge of our property, and it's about a 2-foot retaining wall. Now, it doesn't go all the way up to Alpine Ave, but it does show that grade change there. Lighting, we're agreeable to revise the lighting to meet whatever the 0 foot candles at the property lines are. That's no problem. Definitely the concrete sidewalk, I think that was just a miscommunication. We're definitely willing to provide that, no problem. I think it's a good comment. The radii item, I was trying to figure out how we could accomplish that today. Essentially, that little curb there is not wide enough for a full 20-foot radius. So, we would request that we could work with Mr. Connors on some type of flared curb, if that's an option, to provide adequate movement for a truck, or maybe widen that slightly. I know there's the question of getting trucks in here, and we'd be willing to provide truck circulations or whatever we need to prove that we're able to get in. It's just that radius item is difficult to get. And then the last item, the two-way circulation in the rear. Really, we would love to do it that two-way circulation back there. It's the matter, there's a 15-foot buffer. If we can waive 2 feet of that, we're more than happy to make it two-way and proceed in that fashion. We just wanted to keep the plans as consistent with the zone ordinance as possible, and really leave it up to the planning commission on how they would like to treat that. Our preference would be two-way, but obviously we want to abide by the code wherever possible, especially when it comes to buffering our site from the residents. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
This is a Alrig USA, is that tell us about that.
So they are a developer out of Bingham Farms, Michigan. They've done a few projects here in Walker. Do a lot of drive-through restaurants, medical offices, retail centers, really all across the Midwest.
Okay, so tell me about the medical office then.
So it'll be an urgent care clinic. Basically, your COVID shots, your COVID testing, flu shots, that kind of stuff. They don't perform overnight stay. There's no overnight stay. The hours are 8 to 8. You go in there, your kid, cut his hand on a can opener or something, gets a few stitches. He's out the door the next day. It's not the kind of thing, or out the door the same day. It's not the kind of thing where, serious medical overnight stays where people would be there. So, it's just your standard urgent care clinic.
So this Alrig is a company that builds these.
Yes.
And then where do the doctors and stuff come from then?
The doctors are generally local. I don't know the whole business model for the urgent care clinic, but I believe they hire local doctors. Alrig would be the developer who would build the building for the urgent care clinic, because they don't specialize in, construction, hiring contractors, that kind of thing. So Alrig will build the site, build the building, and then the urgent care clinic will come in and operate out of that building.
And you said it's open 8 to 8?
8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Okay.
Just about every day of the week.
Thank you.
Regarding the drive on the back, you mentioned us giving you the extra 2 feet of the buffer, but yet did you see Scott's drawing of actually pushing 2 feet closer to the building and not going into that buffer? Is that a possibility or no?
That is, we can go 2 feet to the building, but there is a sidewalk and a door in the rear, so we have to maintain that 5-foot offset off that door to maintain ADA compliancy with that door back there. So we're definitely open to it, and we'll push it as close as we can, but we gotta operate within ADA compliancy, and then if you guys will allow any sort of infringement on that buffer, we're willing to do that, but I can't just propose a site that is non-ADA compliant, if that makes sense. So it may be 2 feet, it may be 1.5 feet. It's going to vary in between 2 feet and 0 feet throughout that area back there.
Gotcha.
Any other comments, questions?
I can help out a little bit with the driveway issue to the north there. Technically, for them to be out of compliance, they wouldn't apply necessarily here. We generally have a good discussion, but the way our highway rules and regulations are written, it would be a variance to the city engineer and DPW director. So we can work that out at staff level. I think that's fair. And the idea about widening that driveway a little bit to account for a bigger vehicle is probably fair because of the tight right of way. So I think we can work that out.
Now, you've got a third actor here, though, do you not, with MDOT being on Alpine?
For the Alpine Drive, but we're not too worried about that one.
Okay.
Did we discuss the Alpine Drive, the right in, right out? Because I know we are suggesting that, but are you agreeable to something like that?
Not right in, right out. So we really need to keep left in, because someone traveling southbound on Alpine is gonna have a tough time getting to site. They would have to know that they have to turn left down to the south at that light there, loop all the way up, and it's really gonna make a headache for them. I understand that left out is kind of the major concern, because you're crossing 2 rows of traffic and you're moving, and you gotta make that move, so,
It's actually 4 lanes. 'Cause you
4
gotta go
lanes,
through- You got
yes.
3 lanes and then the turn lane,
and the turn lane.
yeah.
So if the planning commission would be agreeable to this, the developer, would be agreeable to right in, left in, but restrict egress on Alpine to right out only, if that is agreeable. So full movement in, right out only. So we put a curb and a kind of a pork chop to funnel all traffic to go right, and put a sign that says no left turns.
Yeah, I can see that.
In terms, again, coordinating with MDOT on that driveway, what's the likelihood that that type of a drive restriction would be workable?
Very likely. They've reached out to us and they want to have our local input, and that usually means they want to try to help out, so I think it'd be pretty good.
So that would mean would restrict left turns out, but it would make allowance for left turns in, kind of a pork chop.
Didn't we do that at the Applebee's on Lake Michigan Drive or somewhere like that? Yeah, I think that's an effective solution here.
Yeah, I think, if I could chime in, I think it's definitely an improvement, but the only thing that's strange here is you've got 3 northbound lanes, and at peak hour, 2 of them will be stopped. The 3rd lane, furthest to the east, is usually going 40 miles an hour. So, I agree with you. I think that would certainly be an improvement, but it's certainly not going to have the overall impact that like the Kingsbury correction did. But certainly be an improvement, and I can hear Kerwin Keene from MDOT in my ear saying, we want to do what the city wants to do. So I don't think you're going to have a problem with MDOT either. I agree with Scott.
Cross-access is also recommended by staff with the adjacent property. I guess short-term, if I'm understanding correctly, if this condition were to be imposed, the pavement would just be brought up to that common lot line. Obviously, with a 2-foot differential then in grade, there'd have to be some accommodation in just bringing it up there short-term. And then longer-term, then there would be that impact on the parking spaces that would be displaced. Frank, in terms of meeting our minimum, meeting the minimum parking requirements, how would that be addressed?
Because it's a non-PUD, it's a little bit of a challenge, and I know these folks have a target for their parking, so, I'm more than willing to respect that number. What we've done in other circumstances in the past is, we'll say, keep all your parking, put your bumper blocks in right about here, but pave to the property line, 24 feet. So that way, if the use changes over, or if the site to the south comes in, then we can make that connection. So they can still use it as parking space, but it would just be paved 24 feet to the site here. The retaining wall ends right here, if you can see the cursor. We have overcome 6-7 foot grades in some sites on Alpine Avenue because it just rolls with cross connections, and they're not perfect, but they work. They'll give people an opportunity to move around when the road is jammed, or just to go from site to site. So I think we can certainly keep all the parking they want, but we would just ask for an extension that this be paved 24 feet wide here, and they can put their bumper blocks wherever they wanted to do here.
And my only concern with that, and we have no problem paving it if that's just, what we have to do,
Yep.
is, let's say the Steak and Shake comes in for, a redevelopment in 3 years.
Yep.
Does that then remove our parking spaces because that's a cross-access drive? Because I would hate,
No.
we're hoping this medical office stays here for 50 years, and,
Sure.
They're already always open. And then 10 years or 5 years down the line, they all of a sudden lose 4 or 5 of their spaces.
Yep.
I could see how that could create an issue, because, they thought this parking was a little bit tight as it was.
Yeah.
you know, I think we were able to get it to work for them. So that's my only concern, like the legality of how that would be handled.
Sure. No, and that's reasonable. What we would ask for now would be cross-access easements across the property. That would essentially go from driveway to driveway through your drive aisles and then lead down to that connection to the south. So the city would have the ability to say, hey, look, you know, it's time to make this connection happen. However, my guess is that Steak and Shake's gonna be there at least for a couple of years. And if it would become, you will already have some real world study on how many parking spaces you actually need on this site. So if it was gonna become a major encumbrance, then we could always bring it back to the planning commission at that time and they could potentially remove that condition of approval. You know, if you're really jammed up here and you just need every square inch of pavement for parking, I don't know if that necessarily is gonna happen, but at least we'll have it'll be set just in case the Steak and Shake site redevelops. And if it is going to become a major problem for these folks because they're so overloaded at peak hours or whatever, then maybe we can come back to planning commission and take the condition off. The city's job is really to look out for public safety. And I know your job is to make sure the site meets your user. So that may be a reasonable compromise, where we get everything in place, but we can etch a sketch it back if they absolutely need every parking space.
And I'm not trying to be difficult.
Yeah.
You know, I love working with you guys. The only thing I'd like clarification on there is if we dedicate an easement, that would be dedicated to the Steak and Shake parcel, correct?
Yes.
So that easement is in place, it's recorded. If they pull title on their property, that easement would come up.
Yep.
Once that easement's in place, is there any mechanism, I'm not an attorney, to tell Steak and Shake owners, no, you actually don't have cross access because they don't have enough parking? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, and you know what, I'm not an attorney either, so I don't want to get into the attorney game, but I know that easements can be removed. And our process here would be, all right, you can apply to the planning commission to remove those easements. They're part of a site plan approval. And if the planning commission sees that now you've been there for 2 or 3 years and that site needs every parking space, and we can come up with maybe we can make a better connection to the south, you know, when Steak and Shake comes in, that you don't need that connection to the north. There may be some variables there that make it easier to pull the easement off. You can do that.
Well,
I've seen that happen before.
I've vacated easements before, but
Yeah.
the two parties of this easement would be our office and the Steak and Shake parcel.
We don't do that anymore. They're unilateral. So you would not need to get signatures. Way back in the day, we would require signatures from both properties that would be impacted. But what we do now is they're just unilateral. So you're essentially recording a cross-access easement. You'll state it's for the benefit of the parcel to the south, but they're not going to be co-signers on the easement.
But if it benefits the parcel to the south, so you're saying they would not be on this easement document?
No,
This
they would
document
not.
would be signed by us.
Yep.
It would, so if they pulled title on their property, would it show up as a cross-access?
It would not. They would have to pull title on your parcel number and address for that to pop up.
Okay, if that's the case, then that's fine. I
Yeah.
think we can do that.
And we've been doing that for a long time. Way back in the 90s, it was dual signatures, and wow, was that a challenge, right? Especially on retrofits. So this way, if it's unilateral, you can peel it off if you want to in the future, because Steak and Shake's probably not even going to know it's there.
And we've never bullied anybody in all the time we've been here. It's a long time. Like Frank said, he's old.
Yeah.
So we've never bullied anybody into one of these things. We'll always try to find a solution.
Yeah, and I understand, and I'm not trying to be difficult. Is there any way that this item could be approved pending review by, I would just love to have the attorney take a look at it and the developer. I don't think it's a deal killer either way for this job. I just don't think I have the knowledge and to adequately explain to the developer what easement they're committing to.
You can certainly make it a condition of approval. We'll have Jeff Slugga draw up the easement anyway. So if you want to punt the cross-access, you can generally state the location on here, subject to legal negotiations between the city attorney and the attorney for the developer.
Yeah, we're open to it. I just need to be careful of the verbiage on that.
Yep.
And that's a little bit out of my simple civil engineer mind.
Are we requiring them to pave to the, excuse me, pave to the border or just record the easement?
Well, you could bust it into two, which is you could say you're required to pave to your common property line now, 24 feet of an aisle, still meeting engineering standards for turn and stacking, et cetera, because you don't necessarily want to jam that all the way up, in the stacking for the driveway. But you could say you need to pave 24 feet, subject to review by the city engineer, make sure that it goes in the right spot, and separately work on a cross-access easement to add to the paving. You can separate the two. That way, at least, worst comes to worst, the paving's in place. They'll treat it like a parking spot. There'll be some pavement on the other side of the bumper block that'll just be paved. But if we can't work something out on easement-wise, that's maybe all right too. My goal is just to get that paving there. We can usually work things out in the future.
And we're fine to pave up to the property line. That's the issue.
They don't want to encumber the property, and I understand that.
As long as no 4x4 decides to go over the block and into the steak and shake. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, remember Menards way back in the day, between Menards and Walmart, that goes way back. They put bollards right through the cross access, and that was a really important connection. So we learned about that.
Now, this is not a public hearing, but if we have somebody in the audience that was here for this project that wanted to have any comment? No? Okay. Commissioners, we've had some conversation about some of the recommendations from the staff level. Generate support for those recommendations based upon the conversations now, or is there anything that you feel is hanging out there yet? Okay. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion for case number 22-029. I make a motion to approve the proposed site plan and supporting materials for the medical building at 3500 Alpine Avenue Northwest, subject to the following conditions and based on the findings of fact noted below. Conditions of final area site plan approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the Community Developers Director's letter dated 9/26/22. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 9/28/22. The Alpine Avenue driveway will be first full service in, right turn only out. Cross access easement, the applicant will pave to the border 24-foot wide at the west drive, what do you call that, driveway?
I would say the southwestern corner, subject to review by the city attorney, or excuse me, city engineer.
Southwest corner, subject to review by city engineer. Cross-access easement is to be formulated by the city attorney. The public sidewalk shall continue through the driveway, not just the striping. Findings of fact for section 94-283. The 3500 Alpine Avenue Medical Office Project, as illustrated and described by the project application and site plan material, meets the standards of section 94-283 for the following details: dimensional requirements, building arrangement, stormwater management, utility services, vehicular access and parking, pedestrian access, exterior lighting, landscaping and buffering and signage, and one additional condition of final area site plan approval. The east drive will be 24-foot wide as is suggested by the city engineer, allowing 2-foot
Two-way traffic.
allowing for two-way traffic and 2 feet into the right-of-way or buffer to the neighbor to the east.
There you go.
Gosh, that was stuttering.
You did a fine job.
Well, did we want to give them full 2 feet of that buffer or a mixture of buffer and to the ADA? He said he could take maybe like a foot
Yeah, the
there and
mixture
a
of
foot
buffer
there.
and for the ADA on the west and up to 2 feet on the buffer on the east.
There you go. Sounds good.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there support? Support. Motion by Tyler, supported by Mark to conditionally approve the request. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. All right, the last item is has been tabled from the last meeting. We've got it noticed as a public hearing. I thought we had closed the hearing on it.
Yeah, that's a clerical error. You have, I think it was 7/6, July 6th, you held the public hearing and closed it. So this is just FASP review.
Okay, all right. So with that, we'll look to Community Development Director.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to remove from the table the tidal wave auto spa, case number 22-016.
Do you have a motion? Is there support?
Second.
Second by Scott. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. Now Frank.
Okay, this is your third review of this plan, of this final area site plan. And obviously I wasn't part of the first two. So I'm kind of dropping in and commenting based on what city engineer and planning commission has been talking about for the past two meetings. Okay, so what I would like to do, if it's okay, is go through three general comments in my staff report that follow through with what you folks have been talking about and raising some concerns about. So under staff analysis and recommendations in my staff report, first item is employee parking. And what I'm seeing on the revised site plan that you see in front of you, and the developer is here too, so we'll ask them to clarify if I'm making a mistake here. But 5 employee parking spaces are provided, including 1 ADA space. And the developer is stating there are 3 to 4 employees on site. So it appears that the employee parking is accommodated on the site. But we'll let the developer clarify that, and that's obviously something for you folks to decide on. The second item is off-site sound impacts. They have provided an updated sound and acoustic analysis that's dated 9/6/22. And what's interesting, which you normally don't see in reports like this, is on pages 3 and 4, the report calls out that the car wash will violate the Walker noise ordinance, which I was kind of surprised to see. There are, on the southerly edge, it would violate our noise code during normal operation hours. And then on the southeasterly edge, facing the apartments, the ordinance would be exceeded only between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Now, I don't know what the hours of operation are proposed here. That can be clarified. But, this is potentially what I call a fatal flaw in the plan, that they're essentially giving you material that says, we're going to violate your noise ordinance. So that raises a red flag for me, and I think that's something you folks have been talking about. And last but not least, my most important issue here, not that the sound isn't important, but I always look for public safety first, particularly on our M roads. We just did that on M37. Here's M11, M45 to the north. You've got a new signalized intersection right there at Westtown Drive and Wilson. All of the interior access roads here are private, so they're fairly narrow. They're maybe not spaced like we would do with public streets. So my comment is the Westtown Drive and then the north-south connector drive are very close to that intersection. If you go out there, in plan view like this on paper, it's one thing. If you go out there and you look, it's pretty close. So my concern, and I think I share the concerns that you folks have raised, is the stacking they're showing there at peak hour. If we look at our other car washes in the area, both in Grand Rapids, in Walker, and in the surrounding area, even up to Alpine, north of 4 Mile, there's some serious stacking that goes on. And your code clearly states that for car washes that you need to accommodate all your stacking on your property. The stacking can't be on a street. Well, the interpretation there is that the service drives, West Town Drive and then the North-South Drive are de facto streets. And my concern is that at peak hour, with all the other high-traffic generators in this PUD, Chick-fil-A, Culver's, what's the coffee shop? It's not Starbucks. How could I forget that? You know, you may have this site may be at its carrying capacity for high peak hour, peak volume uses. So that all said, I agree with your comments regarding concerns about stacking and blocking the service drives and potentially blocking M11. I am going to get out of the way. We did provide a model motion that's fairly open-ended. And if we get to that point, whether you approve or deny, I'm just asking for some findings of fact in detail, just to bolster the record. That's enough for me. I'll get out of the way. Scott has a report, and he knows a lot more about this site than I do.
Really, just one fundamental comment. You've seen 3 reports from us on this with lots of different site plan review things, and they've tried to work through most of those, but just from a fundamental standpoint, does this use fit on the site? And they have tried really hard to try to make this fit, but there's just a couple spots on here that I think it's up to the Planning Commission to look at that and determine, are we going to back vehicles out onto the road? What's that going to do to the other businesses that are out there? Is it going to have an impact on M11? That northern driveway, the one below the entrance, the northbound lane is right up against the road. It's literally 1 foot away. I mean, there just isn't any room to make adjustments there. And so I think we're down to that from an engineering standpoint is, do you believe that this use fits on this pretty tight site? So I think I'll just leave it at that and certainly answer questions.
One question that you carried through this, not to belittle the items that we highlighted, but also just the easement. Is there an easement in that private drive? I don't know, in looking over this information, that we still have something in hand that represents an easement.
Yeah, and that was a big concern for me too, because I could see where some of the lines were coming out of the road, and was there a mistake made when the service drive was put in? Was it put in the wrong spot and those kinds of things? And it was shown to me that I think I said there were like 60 some encumbrances here, which could mean easements, which could mean all kinds of other things, and one of them was appropriately the cross access. So good enough, I guess, is what I would say. Is it exactly lined up? I think it might have been off just a hair, but it's the intent's there.
Good evening. Kayleigh Bevington. I'm with Bohler Engineering. We're the civil consultant here on behalf of Tidal Wave this evening. I'm from Pittsburgh, so my address is 1573 King Charles Drive, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yeah, as Frank mentioned, we've been here a couple times. I was here at the first meeting. I want to say that was in May or June. I'm sure you guys don't remember me. I remember you, though. And then my colleague Aaron was here back in August, and you guys went back and forth on some comments then as well. So I won't bore you. Is it all the same members of the commission that were there for the previous 2 meetings? Yeah, okay. So I won't redo the whole Tidal Wave presentation, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them about Tidal Wave specifically. I guess I'll go through the comments that Frank and Scott mentioned here, and we can kind of just go through them and see where we go from there. So let me pull up the letter I have here. I'll do stacking last, I guess, since that's kind of the big one that we've talked about here. The second one is the acoustic engineer's report. So we did have a report that we submitted initially, but it wasn't site specific. It wasn't for this site in Walker. So we asked Tidal Wave to go pull a site specific to Walker. Again, they just pulled data from another existing site and kind of apply it to this one. And so that's what they did there. in response to the residential portion of the site being non-compliant, those hours are outside of Tidal Wave's operating hours. The longest set of hours they would have would be in the summer, and those would be 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Usually they kind of follow the sun, right? So if basically once dusk hits, they shut down operations. So it's a little bit shorter in the winter months. As far as the Aldi property is concerned, that one kind of caught us off guard. It's a commercial use. We weren't expecting that. We don't have a site that we can model this kind of mitigation on, but the applicant will be willing to look at mitigation on the blowers in the car wash. I think we're just off by a few decibels at the commercial property line with Aldi. So I don't know if there's something we can do. Like I said, we don't have an existing site we can model, but if we could do some kind of condition, maybe with building review for a mitigation equipment that could be put on the blowers, because that's what's creating the sound is the blowers at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, and again, in the evening hours wouldn't be operating, so that would not be an issue at that property line. Let's see here. Okay, and then stacking. So we kind of have gone back and forth on stacking. We had a different plan in here initially when I was here the first time that actually had less stacking. And so we revised the site plan, shifted the building down, and added more of a queue. So it was better than the first go around. And then I don't even believe stacking really came up at the last hearing. I could be wrong. But stacking was not the major concern at the time. It was the employee parking was the big sticking point. So we believe it's code compliant. The code requires 10 stacking spaces per tunnel. We show 13 up to the pay kiosk, and then even more if you consider all the way through the tunnel. I don't know if the code defines where the stacking starts. Tidal Wave feels this adequately serves the needs of the customer here. They have experience operating over 100 locations, and so I can give you some kind of information about how those operations function. So the attention to detail Tidal Wave washes is kind of what sets them apart. So they can wash over 100 cars per hour. In peak demand settings, attendants, which work, the staff that's on site, they can kind of work at that north end of the building there. They come out, they assist at the pay kiosk as needed to keep things moving, and then they also give hand manual attention to the cars that are entering the car wash there. On average, roughly 60% of their customers take advantage of the membership program, which expedites the process through the pay station area via a dedicated lane for members that have a tag on the front of their windshield. Should a vehicle not be compatible with Tidal Wave's operation, like a commercial vehicle with roof racks or an oversized truck, something like that, team members can direct them to the bypass lane and get them out of the way quickly, which just diverts them into the vacuum area. On average, Tidal Wave teams load a vehicle into the wash every 30 seconds. They run more than 3 at a time and have the ability to wash about 120 an hour. Based on site averages and the anticipated concentration of customers in this area, they can probably get them through the pay and prep area in about 90 seconds on average. Upon exiting the main car wash building, customers take advantage of the free vacuum service. And one of the things we went back and forth, on most Tidal Wave sites, it's kind of a one-way deal. Once you're in the vacuums, then you have to exit only. But we did make a concession here on this one and did the two-way access there. The lower driveway there is two-way. I know that was a sticking point earlier on, so I just want to make sure that stayed. That has not changed. Yeah, so based on Tidal Wave's car wash capacity, the average service time, anticipated trip generation, all of those things put together, we believe that the stacking is adequate for what Tidal Wave anticipates seeing at this site. And as you know, their business, just like anything else, I mean, they don't want long stacking, they don't want a long queue. That just means people sitting longer, and they want to move people through as quickly as possible. Obviously, that's how they make their money. So they're motivated to keep people moving through. If someone's going to wait too long, they'll go find another car wash, and as you guys know, there's plenty popping up all around. So their goal is to remain competitive, and they certainly don't want to do a disservice to anyone in the community. They want to be a contributing member of the community that only adds benefit to the people that live in the community. So that's my little spiel for stacking. I can answer more questions if you guys have them. The last thing I didn't touch on was employee parking. We did add 2 parallel spaces on that south side of the site. And as Frank mentioned, we moved around the ADA spaces a little bit to cover the employees that would be on staff on a normal shift. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions you have or expand upon anything.
Pat?
Question,
Yes.
why so many vacuum spots?
Um,
I mean, it's just-
24 is really their minimum.
I mean, I'm sure they have a standard, but it just seems like a lot.
It does seem like a lot. They run a lot of these facilities, and they feel 24 is their magic number.
'Cause
So
I've been to a bunch of them around the area, like you said, there's a lot of them. And this is by far like twice as many as
Yeah.
any of them that I've seen. So I'm just saying that could be some space that you could put more cars in a stacking lane if you got rid of some of these. But, you know, I mean, you guys gotta have your footprint that you have corporately, I get it. So I'm just bringing it up. The other thing that I know the noise is, I mean, vacuum motors are becoming more and more quieter. We all know of Dyson. I mean, you go to a bathroom now and the blow dryers, if you got a Dyson one, it's pretty quiet. So, I mean, I'm surprised some of these car washes haven't gone to more quieter because of the noise ordinance in most locations. I mean, and just more insulation around some of these motors can be. But
Yeah.
that's just cost.
actually, the vacuums aren't the noise maker here. The noise
the
is generated
blowers.
from the blowers.
The
and
blowers as
yep,
the doors open to let the cars out. Yep, I get it.
Yep. Yeah, the vacuums are actually totally encompassed in that building there at the top of the vacuums. And then it's piped underground, so they're relatively quiet.
Is there a way to regulate the vacuums from a standpoint of they can all shut down at like 8 o'clock? Or could somebody come in a vacuum at 11 o'clock at night because they went out drinking and they spilled something and they come in and all of a sudden the vacuum's going on 11, 1 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, no, they close down. When staff leaves the site, they close down.
So there'll be a
operations.
gate, they can't get in?
There's no gate proposed, but
If they have change or money to start the vacuum, they can do it.
What's that?
If they have change or something, they could start the vacuum.
Well, the vacuums are free, so my understanding is they would shut the system off.
To shut the whole system, okay.
During your presentation, you mentioned that, thanks. During your presentation, you mentioned that perhaps there'd be some way to go through mitigation of the blowers. What would that entail?
I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I think there's like a baffle or enclosure they can put around the blowers to lower the decibels just a bit. I mean, you're never going to remove the sound entirely, but to kind of block that sound as much as possible, something like that.
Okay.
So I say we could do it something when we would submit architecturals. Like I said, we don't have anything to model, but the applicant's definitely willing to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Well, employee parking, again, as appears to have been addressed. The off-site sound impacts with their hours of operation, it appears to address the time periods when they would be at issue with the residential to the east. And it's just a question with regard to the sound that's going to the commercial area to the south, whether they can come up with a mitigation measure to address that particular aspect of it. So that one's kind of out there, and just be relying upon their ability to come up with a way to mitigate the sound for that. The vehicle access and stacking, I think, is really going to be the key. I think both Frank and Scott have described from a staff standpoint their concerns as far as that's a very critical factor in terms of the safety, not only on the ring road, but as that ring road ties in with the access onto Wilson, becomes even more critical. So in terms of our standards, is there a specific number of stacking spaces that's minimum required?
If you look at the C1 code, it only requires 3 stacking spaces. So obviously that is probably contextually inappropriate for a modern car wash. It probably fits better for the kind of drive-through you may see associated with a gas station. It really, my opinion, it doesn't fit for something like this or for Mr. Car Wash, which are much higher volume. But that's what the code says. It says 3. Now, as part of your planning and development, you do have a bunch of findings of fact. And, you know, one of them I would relate back to that C1 code for, you know, it only requires 3 stacking spaces in the C1, but it also says you can't stack onto a street. So that's, I think, when you get into the discretion that the Planning Commission has in a planned unit development to say, does this use fit the site when it comes to traffic management? That's totally in play.
So there is that discretion afforded to us if that's a overriding concern. Any conversation concerning that?
As far as the stacking piece,
Correct.
I mean, I don't know. I struggle with it just because if they think they need 24 vacuums, then I picture that number of cars on site at one time could be like a viable, real possibility. And how does that lay out through the stacking? And I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to process all of it and figure out what I think is realistic versus what is appropriate. And certainly the other uses in the development are problematic when it comes to the idea of stacking off-site. So, I don't know.
Well, let's look at what's the problem with the corner? We got a whole lot of traffic there. We all know that. It's getting worse. We've got some real chicken fill and coffee places, and it's getting bigger. Maybe it isn't their fault, but maybe this is the last place, and that's tipping the thing over. I don't think it's a good place for this.
Stacking's always been an issue to me since the beginning of this. I'm a member of Mr. Car Wash, and I was at the one on Alpine with my fruit basket on Saturday afternoon, which was a very nice afternoon if you noticed. I was 17th in line because they triple stack up top. I counted 17. I couldn't quite see around the corner. There might have been one more, who knows. And there was still space behind me. And I've seen the Mr. Car Wash on the hill on Alpine by the cemetery, or Leonard on the cemetery back up onto the road several times. Anytime it's sunny, actually. So the stacking issue to me is huge, and I can't get past it.
This is a very busy corner already. We have 3 prominent businesses just down the street. They all have stacking of 3 times the amount that this is proposing. So I can't agree to this unless they want to take some vacuums out and move the stacking line inside the road, give it to, 10, 12, 14 stacks inside the road before you make the turn to come around. Because, that's going to be a busy corner already, coming out of the apartments, going into Meyer. So, yeah, the stacking is the drawback on this for me.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of the same comments that have already been made with the stacking. The sound as well, while not as important as the public safety and stacking issue, they've basically laid it out there that their vacuums are likely to violate the noise ordinance. So those two things in mind, and just I can't get past either of those two issues.
Can I just build on Scott's comment a little bit? The noise thing was a little bit shocking to me, and I do just want to say that, like, I'm usually shocked by what can get under our noise ordinance. So that is a little bit jarring to me as well.
From my standpoint, the stacking is a key factor here. Pat mentioned that if they reduce the number of vacuum spaces, and perhaps they could re-engineer the site to provide more on-site stacking, I think that would. I think they've done as much as they could with this site as it is. That I don't know that there's anything else that could be done with these confines to address that or overcome that concern. So that I think is a major sticking point and a reason why I would not be in favor of approving the use at this location.
Can I ask a question? So how would you determine what number would be appropriate for stacking then? Because if we don't use the code and I've provided data, is it just subjective? Like, as a designer, we go by numbers, so we're looking for what stacking do I need to hit, but you guys are all just saying it doesn't feel right.
Well,
So what would be the appropriate amount of stacking, I guess is my question.
usually the code will specify minimums. And in this case, there's a concern for the traffic, and each of these sites that are within this PUD have been scrutinized. Chick-fil-A, as well as Culver's and Starbucks. That was a very big concern in all of them, and we spent considerable amount of time there. And we reached a point where we felt that they were able to move it through adequately. But again, as you add those up, as we come with this particular location and its proximity to the intersection with Wilson Avenue, it's becomes even more poignant in terms of how important it is. So it's a case here that we're basing it upon the comments we get from staff and our comments amongst ourselves, and that's what we're going to base our individual votes on this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Now, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chair, case number 22-016, Tidal Wave Car Wash, final area site plan. I make a motion to deny the final area site plan for the Tidal Wave Car Wash at 248 Wilson Avenue Northwest, based on the findings of fact noted below. Number one, noise, odor, light, or other external effects, including traffic stacking, traffic congestion from the proposed car wash, will adversely affect adjacent Westtown PUD lots and uses. We've noted that the stacking is a major concern amongst all on the planning commission. The proposed car wash would impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of the Westtown PUD and surrounding property for uses permitted in applicable zoning districts. It's very close to some major intersections and heavy traffic volumes. The affected public services and facilities, including public streets such as M11 and private service drives in the Westtown PUD, would not be capable of accommodating increased services and facility loads caused by the proposed car wash, as noted in previous comments.
We've got a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Question for Frank, a denial here, where does that leave the project?
Yeah, that means that it's just a final denial. So there, from a city standpoint, the project would just be dead. We would close the file.
Would require a resubmittal for further review.
Yes, and there's a time, we'll interpret the code for when you can resubmit, Typically, the resubmittal is a year. Plan unit development, we would look at if there's any significant changes to a plan in order to come back to the planning commission. But short of that, this would just be a denial of the FASP.
It doesn't mean that nothing can happen here. It's just, this doesn't seem like the right site for this use. It's still a great site.
What may fit well there is, you know, take a look at the Aspen Dental, or I know we're tapped out in Quick Medical there, but even a strip center, you know, with a couple of tenant spaces in there, something like that would probably fit here just fine. From because you're reaching that carrying capacity, and I think that's the thing that you folks keep coming back to. And you know, the comment of, well, what's the standard? Well, the standard is in a plan unit development, it's the planning commission's job to look at all of the sites and what does the plan unit development look like from a functional standpoint? And I think what you've been saying in so many words is we're just tapped out on the amount of large peak hour trip generators you can put on this relatively small property.
Exactly.
Amen. Well thought out.
There we go. That's enough from me.
Okay, any other questions? We'll call the question on the vote. All those in favor of denial indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
It's rare that we actually deny something without going, well, this is the third iteration, so,
Sometimes you gotta do it.
yeah, yeah. I don't like it.
I was gonna suggest you go down.
You always
down
want it to work
down
out,
the
but-
street, go on the other side like Michigan Drive, there's a spot there still.
Yeah, the challenge is you've got to respond to the plan as presented and in the location it's presented. So I know what you're saying. Nobody likes to deny site plans. We try to not do that very often.
From a staff perspective, next meeting,
All right, I will be brief because I'm sure everybody wants to get home. Next meeting will be on the 19th. We have one item. It'll be for a distribution center in the Northridge West IPUD. That's on Lot 2, if you remember that IPUD that you guys just reviewed at the PASP level, fairly recently here. You did that in September.
Last meeting, Terry.
okay.
Yeah.
You weren't there.
So they're pushing pretty hard to get this one going. It's a fairly large building. I can't remember the exact square footage, but it's a large warehouse distribution center. And I think those are coming in because you're just close to I-96. And as supply chain and logistics is moving and trying to restore itself, these kind of things are just looking for spots to land, and we're in the right spot. So that will be on your 1019 agenda. That's the only item on there. So that'll be FASP review. And one of the conditions on there will be that you can't get your building permits until the city commissioner gives final approval on the IPUD rezoning. So that's going, first reading will be on 1010, which will be Monday night there. But like I've said to the developers, that won't be official until end of November. By the time you do 2 readings, and then you've got the referendum period of 8 days and publication. So even if you guys approve this on the 19th, they won't be able to pull their permits until the first week in November. So that's 1019, and then the other item I'll leave you with is we have 4 interviews scheduled next week for a potential replacement planning director. So we've got a broad swath of talent, and we are very pleased to see who applied. And now we go into the interview process, and we'll see who shakes out. And so we're hopeful that maybe we can get a new planning director on board before Thanksgiving. If not, you'll see me and Scott tag teaming and going from there. So thank you. Good night.
Motion to adjourn.
All right.